بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب ولكن البر من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر والملائكة والكتاب والنبيين وآتى المال على حبه ذوي القربى واليتامى والمساكين وابن السبيل والسائلين وفي الرقاب وأقام الصلاة وآتى الزكاة والموفون بعهدهم إذا عاهدوا والصابرين في البأساء والضراء وحين البأس أولئك الذين صدقوا وأولئك هم المتقون
الذين ينفقون أموالهم بالليل والنهار سرا وعلانية فلهم أجرهم عند ربهم ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون.
Recognized as the most notable expression of Islamic philanthropy, Waqf is the voluntary, permanent and irrevocable dedication of a portion of one's wealth, in cash or kind, to provide for continuous streams of benefits to the community, both Muslims and non-Muslims. Standing out as one of the greatest achievements of Islamic civilization, Waqf is a philanthropic foundation, an integral part of Islamic society, with the mission of maximizing the value of endowments. For hundreds of years, Waqf was used to lift millions out of poverty, foster trust between the community and the donors, and served as a tool for community empowerment and poverty alleviation. Also known as Sadaqah Jariyah, Waqf is irrevocable, inalienable, and provides perpetual rewards that add to the social welfare of communities. It plays a significant role in creating a sustainable economic model for future generations, whilst covering a wide range of public services like clothing, food, shelter, education and healthcare, which have a direct bearing on economic growth and quality of life. However, in the last 2 centuries, the institution and importance of Waqf has seen a decline, from a way of life to merely a religious belief. Orchestrated by the colonial powers, Waqf assets today exist in smaller numbers, lying idle, underutilized and mismanaged.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to all the participants sitting here, and also welcome to all the participants that have tuned in onto our live stream platforms on YouTube and on Facebook. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala mursaleen. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Brothers and sisters, very, very warm welcome to all of you today. This program is hosted by the National Awqaf Foundation of South Africa, Awqaf South Africa, and we're very glad that you've decided to join us here this afternoon or tonight or wherever you may be. We do have guests from Nigeria, from Malaysia, from Niger, from Pakistan and many other countries. Those of you that have joined us on the live stream platform of YouTube and Facebook. Please feel free to put forward any of your questions that you may have. We'd like to entertain that after the presentation by Brother Aasif. And we'd like to also, once we have the program actually will be where we have Sister Nur Asia from Malaysia, who will give a little presentation. Thereafter, we'll have Brother Aasif, and then we'll have a so to you, down there in Cape Town, you may proceed with us.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. I am Professor Dr. Nur Asia binti Muhammad from International Islamic University, Malaysia. I'm also the Vice President to Awqaf and Main Committee for Global Waqf Conference series. First of all, I would like to thank South Africa Awqaf, especially to Mr. Zainul Abidin and his team for the opportunity to say a few words about Global Waqf Conference. Ladies and gentlemen, Global Waqf Conference started its first gathering in 2013 in Kuala Lumpur, beginning with the establishment of the International Center for Waqf Research, or ICWR IIUM, and the first event was hosted by IIUM and the Foundation for Waqf and Welfare of the Malay Chambers of Commerce Malaysia, or YKPD. The ICWR was tasked to bring Waqf to the global arena, and one of the initiatives is to organize Global Waqf Conference. And Alhamdulillah, since 2014, the amanah has been successfully carried out by our team. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, the Global Waqf Conference series share a mission to create an international platform for discourses relating to Waqf and other Islamic social finance. From 2013 till 2022, we have organized Global Waqf Conference in Kuala Lumpur, in Istanbul, in Moscow, in Swansea, United Kingdom, in Pekanbaru, Indonesia, Bangkok, and also Bahawalpur, Pakistan. And we have covered various themes, including Waqf for the economy of the Ummah, Waqf management, Waqf trust and endowment as the third sector economy, Waqf as a way of life, practicing Waqf direction in every facet of life, and the most recent, Waqf inclusiveness in the new Islamic economic and finance model. Alhamdulillah, we have outreach to more than 1,000 participants from all over the world. Waqf in Moscow marked a history of the first international Waqf conference held in the Russian Federation. In Swansea, United Kingdom, we engaged with the locals and visited and contributed to the establishment of a mosque, which was originally a cathedral. In Indonesia, during the 5th Global Waqf Conference, we organized 3 workshops on halal industry, Waqf governance, as well as on Islamic finance by IIUM and UNIRAZA. So this is also a way how we engage with the local in propagating practical Waqf or Waqf in action. The 6th GWC was held in Bangkok in 2018. This conference managed to see government-to-government relationship with direct involvement of Thailand government in organizing the Global Waqf Conference. And for the first time, Cambodia has participated in the Global Waqf Conference in that year. In 2019, the conference was organized with Islamic Development Bank Jeddah as the main sponsor. This 7th GWC was held in Kuala Lumpur, and for the first time, a pre-conference event was held with a representative from various countries. The pre-Global Waqf Conference aimed to gather all Waqf leaders from all over the world and plan to set for Global Waqf Master Plan. The 7th GWC attracted an overwhelmingly large audience of over 600 participants, 600 attendees from all over the world, including South Africa. In 2020, despite the COVID-19 pandemic, we organized 8 Global Waqf Conference virtually, hosted by Unirazak and Fintira. And we managed to secure 700 registered online participants. During this discussion, we cover various issues including Waqf-linked sustainable investment, cash Waqf, issues of Waqf of public universities, Waqf housing, Waqf and blockchain, and management of Waqf and trust fund. In 2021, we managed to organize a hybrid GWC by the Ahmad Ibrahim Kuliah of Laws International Islamic University and iWaqf with the assistance of our partners, including Fintira. We co-hosted the parallel sessions with our new partners, Wasit from Indonesia and Islamia University, Bahawalpur, Pakistan. With the theme embracing the present and envisaging the future, we had more than 1,000 participants virtually and physical. In 2022, we mark another year of impactful Global Waqf Conference as we had our conference organized by Islamia University, Pakistan. In this 10 GWC, we managed to invite 16 speakers from United Kingdom, Indonesia, Turkey, Nigeria, Mauritius, South Africa, Niger, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Thailand, Malaysia, Pakistan, and also others. We managed to publish selected papers in 4 journals and also in e-proceeding. Indeed, without the support from all, it is hard to organize an international conference on annual basis and also to publish articles in journals and book. But Alhamdulillah, again, Global Waqf Conference has published 3 books related to Waqf. Ladies and gentlemen, undoubtedly, the Global Waqf Conference series have reached a global audience and showcased the importance of the conference through its various themes promoted annually. With that note, I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant South Africa Awqaf a successful program. Thank you very much.
I should have actually just introduced her to you. Professor New Asia Mohammed is a professor at the Ahmad Ibrahim Kuliah of Laws, the International Islamic University of Malaysia. The areas of research are land law, strata properties, and waqf law, harmonization of laws, and Islamic law. She is the Vice President of iWaqf and the main committee member for the Global Waqf Conference since 2014. She authored books on waqf law and management in Malaysia. She co-authored a book on Malaysian land law and edited 2 books on waqf. She published more than 40 articles and chapters in books. She's married with 6 children, actively involved in presenting papers on laws, waqf, and students development locally and abroad. She's also a council member of the Islamic Center for Waqf Research at the International Islamic University of Malaysia. So, we're very, very pleased to have been in contact with her. She has kindly facilitated a lot of the work that has been done on the Global Waqf Conference. And she's really a key member of the Global Waqf Conference. That brings us to the presentation that was actually done by our brother Aasif, who's here with us. So just by way of introduction, Aasif Bulbulia is a researcher with a background in education and the study of Islam. He presented his honors research, Land as Waqf and Mia's Farm. And I think everyone sitting around here knows Mia's Farm. What he did was looked at Mia's Farm as a deep colonial case study. So this was presented at the 10th Global Waqf Conference in Bahawalpur, Pakistan. This year, Aasif will be heading to Stellenbosch University to pursue a master's in education policy studies with a focus on education for the co-creation of decolonial futures. Very heavy words there. We'd like to unpack what Aasif has in mind about how he plans to decolonize our minds. Inshallah, for those few words, I'm going to hand over to Aasif.
When we take care of each other, wonderful things happen. Children thrive, the elderly rejoice, communities celebrate. Awqaf South Africa, a charitable Waqf receiving organization, makes it easy to share the care. All donations are plowed into Sharia-compliant investments, while the fruits support a great variety of charitable causes. Visit the Awqaf South Africa website at awqafsa.org.za to discover how your Waqf can bless our community with the legacy of care. Awqaf South Africa, share the care.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. It gives me great pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon. I'm deeply grateful to the Council of for putting me with the opportunity to travel to Pakistan and also this opportunity to share some of the reflections and ideas that emerged from that trip. So without any further ado, we're going to look at the slideshow, inshallah, and take it from there. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad Before I begin, I think it's important to open with a disclaimer to say that the views expressed in this report are my own and are not necessarily those of Awqaf South Africa, of the Global Waqf Conference or its strategic partners. I've done the best to the utmost of my ability to capture my experiences as honestly, carefully, and truthfully as possible. But if there are any errors, they are my own. And if anybody has any questions or queries, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, inshallah. To give a brief overview as to how I intend to structure the presentation this afternoon, I will take a moment to introduce myself, to introduce the conference and its context, to touch on some of the key themes that emerged through the conference proceedings, and to touch on a few points of discussion and analysis that I would like to delve into a little bit more deeply before concluding, inshallah. As Uncle Zainul mentioned, my name is Aasif Bulbulia. I'm a researcher from Johannesburg, South Africa, with a deep interest and a passion for understanding how our ways of being Muslim have been impacted by the systems of coloniality and modernity.
I approached this journey to Pakistan with a deep sense of excitement and curiosity as a third to fourth generation South African Muslim who has at least one great grandparent born in South Africa. As a researcher, I'm driven by a core question, and that question is, what does it mean to be Muslim in the context of societies that are still contending in many ways with continuities of colonialism and apartheid? My honors research focused on Waqf and its role in the institutionalization of Islam in South Africa, with a particular focus on the Waqf of Mia's farm, which many of us may be familiar with, but I'll touch on that in a few moments, inshallah. And as Uncle Zainul mentioned, this year I'll be heading down to Stellenbosch University to pursue a master's in education policy studies with Professor Islam Fatah. As Dr. Noor Asya mentioned, the 10th Global Waqf Conference was hosted by Islamia University Bahawalpur in Pakistan from the 2nd to the 4th of December 2022. The theme of the conference was Waqf inclusiveness in the new Islamic economic and finance model. And I attended the conference on behalf of Awqaf South Africa, where I presented this paper. The report that I've compiled is a lot more detailed than this presentation is going to be. It details the experience of traveling to Pakistan, attending the conference, and elaborates on some of the key inputs and presentations that were delivered at the conference. And as I will be getting into, the report engages with the idea of the sources of intention that underpinned much of the work that went on at the conference. To give some context to the city of Bahawalpur, Bahawalpur is situated on the edge of the Cholistan Desert in Punjab. It is a city with a deep and complex history that dates back as far as the Indus Valley civilization. And we're looking at maybe 3,300 to 1,300 BCE. For many years, Bahawalpur was governed as an autonomous princely state by successive generations of Nawabs. Following the partition of the Indian subcontinent, Bahawalpur acceded to Pakistan in 1947. In this year, the Global Waqf Conference was organized through the Institute of Business, Management and Administrative Sciences at Islamia University in Bahawalpur. It is a public university with an enrollment of approximately 60,000 to 70,000 students and 2,000 faculty members. My journey through Pakistan took me to the cities of Lahore, Bahawalpur, Islamabad, and for one night, Multan. The conference opened with some welcoming remarks by Dr. Muhammad Ghazali Md Noor, the convener of the conference, who reflected on the significance of the Global Waqf Conference celebrating its 10th year. He outlined some future principles that could potentially guide, the GWC global network in the next decade, and paid tribute to key figures who played an instrumental role in establishing these networks, without which the conference would not have been made possible. Professor Dr. Athar Mehboob, the Vice Chancellor of Islamia University, thanked the organizing committee for their efforts and spoke about Waqf as an important means of developing ethical, interest-free economies, which is his hope for Pakistan, as I'm sure it would be for all of us. As you can see, countries that were represented at the conference included Nigeria, Gambia, Niger, Malaysia, the UK, and South Africa. But this is just people that were there in person. We had many more that joined in online. As I mentioned, I go into a lot more detail in the actual written report. So for the purposes of this presentation, I've condensed those presentations into 5 key themes, namely governance and management of Waqf assets, Waqf innovations in the Islamic finance sector, case studies, both historical and contemporary, Awqaf in Pakistan, which was a significant theme in itself, and the theme of Waqf ecosystems, which I'll be elaborating on a little bit more. As I'm sure many of us can imagine, and was alluded to in many of the presentations, governance plays an integral role in ensuring the success and or failure of Waqf institutions. And so this was a major theme that came up in the conference. Presenters spoke about the need for Waqf managers to be able to navigate legal contexts and regulatory frameworks, and spoke about the integral role of good governance in developing and sustaining Waqf in the long term. The theme of Waqf innovations touched on very interesting responses to COVID-19 that emerged in contexts like Malaysia, where the concept of Waqf al-Awarid, or emergency Waqf, emerged through a process of ijtihad and reflection on the situation in which people found themselves. Other innovations may included, the development of sustainable social protection schemes and the role that the Islamic finance sector could potentially play in developing those schemes. But also, a few presenters spoke about the use of new innovative technologies like Waqf blockchain products in the Islamic finance sector. Many presenters came to the conference with case studies from various sectors of society, providing practical examples of Waqf initiatives and challenges from Algeria, Turkey, Malaysia, Nigeria, Sri Lanka, among others. And within this, that is where my presentation comes, looking at the Asma as a case study. As I mentioned, Awqaf in Pakistan was also a major theme, with people speaking about the legal challenges of navigating in Pakistan, the difficulty of finding accurate data to tabulate and capture the situation and context of Pakistan. But also speaking about developments in Pakistan and in innovative ways of establishing working within this region. And as I shall be expanding, the theme of Waqf ecosystems is one that really stood out. It is a theme that focuses on shifts from traditional ways of conceptualizing Waqf and beginning to think deeply and in complex ways about the stakeholder relationships that shape and create the environment in which Waqf is institutionalized. So Dr. Noor Asia, who we just heard from, spoke about Waqf ecosystems in the context of risk management. She elaborated that management has a couple of main roles, and one of which being to ensure the perpetuity and sustainability of Waqf, as well as maximizing the benefits of the government. She discussed risk management is now taking place in the context of distinct shifts from traditional Waqf concepts, where categories have evolved in complex ways. Whereas traditionally, Waqf may have been conceptualized in terms of a Waqf or donor dedicating an asset to a piece of land, which is then developed for Waqf purposes. She explained that today, the role of the donor or Waqf may be taken on by governments, corporations, very complex legal bodies. Likewise, the form of assets that are dedicated to Waqf purposes they have evolved beyond the property, and other forms of asset are now being used for Waqf purposes. Likewise, she spoke about how the beneficiaries of Waqf are not strictly limited to religious institutions or families, but are also being organized in complex ecosystem groups. The main point that Dr. Noor Asia and others who spoke about the ecosystems make is that it's important to pay careful attention to the relationships between different stakeholders, to leverage these relationships and human resources and skills in strategic ways, and to institute clear sustainability mechanisms and regulatory frameworks so that Awqaf are able to last for the next 10 years. Dr. Putri Aina from Malaysia gave a very interesting presentation on the potential applications Waqf blockchain technology, a new innovation in the Islamic finance sector. Delegates participated in the conference from all over the world, with some tuning in from via live stream and via Zoom. One presentation that stood out for me was that of His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed Lawal Maidoki, the chairman of the Sokoto State Zakat. He made the case that if we are to argue that Waqf is as powerful as we say that it is, then we must present that what we are calling for has to deliver and will deliver yesterday. He spoke about how, in practice, many Hutu-Windis or Waqf practitioners take on these roles by accident, which is why there's then a need for effective training and governance mechanisms. And by the end of his presentation, he encouraged everyone to establish a small Waqf, even if it might be the planting of a tree, or the donation of a house, the donation of a chair. He put it very succinctly when he said, as we talk, we act. And he also stressed the importance of preparing young people, those my generation, for the responsibility of taking Waqf forward. And now come to the focus of my presentation, Land as Waqf and Mia's Farm, a decolonial case study. My presentation focused on a Waqf that has had a very significant impact on the institutionalization of Islam in South Africa. As we may know, Mia's Farm and the land of Mia's Farm is a 2,200 hectare mixed-use development. And my research, my paper focused on the question of how has Waqf been interpreted and applied to the land of Mia's Farm? What effect has this interpretation had, both in terms of the institutionalization of Islam, but also in terms of the shaping and the making of Johannesburg and its spatial patterns? And how might this interpretation be understood in light of decolonial land discourses, which have tried to draw attention to the impact of colonialism in the dispossession of land and the consolidation of colonial structures of power? In this way, I sought to situate the interpretation of Waqf in the broader historical context of settler colonial land dispossession. While highlighting the significant role that the Waqf al-Islamic Institute has played in the institutionalization of Islam in South Africa, I also wanted to engage a little bit more with the more critical points that have been made about Waterfall City as what has been described as a cradle-to-grave city. The point that I tried to make at the conference is that it is necessary and very important for us to historicize our interpretation and application of Waqf, to recognize that our ways of engaging Waqf are both informed and shaped by our historical contexts and can have far-reaching intergenerational consequences. And I was quite encouraged by the interest that was expressed by young Pakistani students, who in their own ways are also trying to grapple with the impact of colonialism on their context. Following the conference, I asked the organizers if it would be possible for me to actually meet with some of the students who work behind the scenes to ensure that the conference is a success. We worked so tirelessly to ensure that things ran smoothly. And they were kind enough to organize it. So on Monday, following the conference, I met with the students. And they gave feedback on their experiences. They reflected on what they had done. And they shared their perspectives on local challenges that they are encountering in their environment. Challenges that some of us may be able to identify with, like rampant inflation, like youth unemployment. Challenges.
Just interrupt. I think people on the live stream are finding it difficult to get summoned. Okay. So can I ask you to speak directly into the mic?
Okay. So among the challenges that these students highlighted were issues like rampant inflation, youth unemployment, but also the devastation of flooding that we know has affected Pakistan in recent months. What I found to be quite interesting is that our conversation and our discussion around Waqf served as an entry point through which we could begin to engage with some of these challenges in a grounded way. And I asked the students if they would be willing to try to develop Waqf prototypes using Waqf in ways that might address some of the challenges that they'd raised. It goes without saying that the conference was replete with new ideas and perspectives that deeply enriched our understanding of Waqf. I found that what all delegates had in common, despite us being from different parts of the world and having different cultural backgrounds and whatnot, was that our mutual appreciation for the dynamic roles that Awqaf can play. I think we need to switch on the slide point in that side. Okay. I found that our mutual appreciation for the dynamic roles that Awqaf can play as mechanisms for socioeconomic empowerment made it relatively easy for us to build relationships and friendships with fellow delegates. Over and above the new theoretical insights that the conference opened up for us, I really appreciated the opportunity that it created for us to be exposed to practical examples and case studies so that we could actually see Waqf in action. Initiatives that were prototyped, for example, in response to COVID-19. Projects that have utilized and are trying to make use of innovative technologies. The emphasis that delegates placed on the need for effective governance mechanisms, knowledge of legal context and regulatory frameworks, and the training of youth, I think spoke to the depth and the complexity of what being in the field of Waqf actually entails. And in the report, I've mentioned that the work that Awqaf South Africa has put into the development of the Corporate Governance Code for Islamic NPOs, which was launched in 2021, may be of tremendous benefit to those who are struggling with issues when it comes to governance, and it is definitely worth checking out. And this is where I now want to focus, the main kind of thrust of my attention. Another important, if implicit, feature of the discourse that emerged through the conference was an acknowledgement, a deep acknowledgement of the ethical limitations of prevailing economic models and systems and their functions. Embedded in the ways in which people spoke about it was a recognition that the economic systems that shape and govern our lives have historically functioned to concentrate wealth and entrench inequality in deeply unjust ways. And the impact that the imposition of these systems has had is deeply, deeply devastating. In reflecting on how these economic systems were enforced through the processes of colonialism, I found that the positioning of Waqf as a potential means of repairing that harm was quite poignant. And it led me to wonder as to what are the deeper sources of intentionality and purpose that would motivate people to organize conferences like that would inspire people to travel such distances, that would inspire people to build these sorts of relationships with one another, despite what it is that despite where we may come from. What is it that informs this passion to advocate for institutions like Waqf and the principles that guide them? And where does the shared passion come from? And the more that I thought about it, the more convinced I became that what lies beneath the surface of this passion for Waqf is a deep wellspring of hope. More specifically, a refusal to succumb to hopelessness. A refusal to accept that those who have been neglected by their societies, and those who have been marginalized, their needs unfulfilled, should continue to be relegated to lives of misery and indignity. And what I found is that in thinking about it, you realize that people who are so passionate about this field are rooted in a deep prophetic concern for the well-being of the people in their societies. Another remarkable feature of this discourse is that at no point were the proposals that people put forward dismissed as being too unrealistic. At no point were the proposals and the ideas that were coming out said to be, unfeasible, unmanageable. In fact, on the contrary, many of these proposals were met with a deep sense of enthusiasm and support. And it led me to wonder as to how might we benefit from resisting the urge to dismiss new ideas from positions of fear, judgment, and pessimism. How might we benefit from embracing new possibilities with hope and excitement? And that to me was one of the most deeply impactful realizations that came from the conference. In conclusion, I found the experience of traveling to Pakistan and attending this conference to be a deeply enriching one. And if there's one way that I might try to conclude and encapsulate the main takeaway, is that I felt inspired to not be limited in our ambition to have a positive change in the world, but at the same time to remain rooted in our submission to Allah, to recognize that all change ultimately comes from Allah, and we are merely the vessels through which that change takes place. Once again, I would like to thank Awqaf SA for the opportunity to giving me this chance to travel. And I want to say more shukriya to our hosts at the Staff Level University for their work, which led to an indelible impression on the conference. And thank you once again for this time. Getting your feedback. Okay, Jazakallah. Did we give him a round of applause? Okay, Jazakallah, Aasif. I think indeed a very thorough report on the conference. I've read through the conference report as well in much more detail. And I think that there's a lot more that you can actually add in terms of the experience that you've had in Pakistan.
Some of the highlights that you mentioned, the effective corporate governance, the knowledge of legal context, regulatory frameworks, training of young people, I think that was quite an important area. I think that we need to actually all implement, and especially I think perhaps you could enlighten us on what has happened, for example, in Pakistan. Is there some kind of educational program that is sort of linked to young people actually getting more acquainted with this concept of Waqf?
So, what's that? Okay, is that better? So if I'm being honest, Uncle Zainul, I don't think I had enough exposure to those ideas and that particular context. From what I could gather, I think that the fact that we had young students involved in the organization of the conference was in some ways an attempt to bring youth on board in establishing, some kind of Waqf succession plan, for lack of a better term. But what I did find is that, there were limited opportunities to actually hear from the young people who were in attendance. So it was hard for us to actually get a sense of how much was being grasped and what meaning they were making of the concepts and the ideas that were being put forward. So yeah, I think to the best of my knowledge, there's still a lot of work to be done, not just in Pakistan, but I suppose here as well.
You mentioned something about, the deeper reasons why people were actually gathered there, and so many people are involved in this whole sector, and what sort of drives them. Have you been able to get some idea?
I think that there's a lot that's unspoken in the interactions that I had the opportunity to have, with, for example, Sheikh Mohammed Lawal Maitoki, with Dr. Noor Asia. I think it requires us to really sit with the delegates to really get a better sense of, what is the source of their intention and what is motivating. Because I think everybody who attends may come with different motivations, right? And our experiences mold those intentions in complex ways. I think if I can maybe speak for myself, a part of that source intention for me was having recently lost my father. There was an element of, wanting to go to the exam. And so that sense of, doing the best that I can to honor his legacy and work with such possible to give me the opportunity to go. It does feature that. And at the same time, it's the recognition of the value of all these sorts of relationships. Especially people who are coming from the south, people that are actualizing and operationalizing from places that have historically colonized and are trying to now attempt to. So I think it's I can only speak for myself in that sense.
Just coming to Ria's part, what would you say, what's your main sort of take on the development of Waterfall City?
So it's an interesting question. So just to give some context again to some of the points that I tried to make in that paper. Many urban planners who have studied Waterfall City have made the argument that in as much as there may be some good that is coming from that development, and I'm not saying that there's no good whatsoever, one of the issues that has emerged is this notion of privatized urbanism in an extreme form. So the argument that they make is that Waterfall City has effectively functioned as a city within the city that, is what they describe as a cradle to grave city. So a child could be born in Waterfall at one of the hospitals. They could go to any of the 3 schools that are there. They could maybe find a job in the retail offices or the corporate spaces that are there. There's retirement villages and a cemetery within the Waterfall City development. So one could hypothetically spend their whole lives within this enclave without ever having to really be exposed to what might be going on outside, right? And for me, I think that this has to be put in the context of, even privatized notions of Islam and theologies of Islam, where our practices of Islam are in some ways disconnected from and isolated from the broader kind of historical context that we find ourselves in, and the challenges that people in our societies, Muslim and non-Muslim, are dealing with. And so one of my, concerns when it comes to the Waterfall City development is the extent to which it entrenches a theology that is deeply disconnected and potentially reproducing much of the same harm that colonialism has caused. That being said, obviously, it's not to dismiss the valuable work that the Mia family has done in supporting the development of Islam in our society. But I think it is important for us to engage historically and to try to look at it from a different perspective and a different angle. Not with the intention of putting that family down, but I think really to approach it from a different perspective. So that's my take.
From my own interaction with the family, I've been told, this probably about more than 10 years ago when we had a meeting with the family there. We were told that there were, the model was that they had 1,000 madrasas, and each madrasa had 100 children, and each madrasa had 1 teacher. So they were employing 1,000 teachers, and 100,000 children were being educated through this Waqf, actually. But that was at a time when this particular development hadn't really gone to the extent that it has gone now. So there are questions about, where are the income that gets generated out of this beautiful work sitting down with, and what sort of impact it's going to make on education, on various other Islamic aspects of kind of be flexible about how will the if I can maybe add to that, right? I think that by Waterfall's own estimation, by the time the workforce is developed, it's going to be worth about approximately 140 billion, which would make it one of the largest working assets, not just in Africa, but potentially in the world. Now again, that's not like again, there were limitations as to what information I have access to in terms of what the trend is, for foreseeable future. But I think it is a remarkable figure, right? When you think about like 148 billion rand, and what does that mean in a context like South Africa, where concentrations of wealth and wealth inequality is such a prominent issue. And how is that wealth going to be concentrated and redistributed? And I think that these are questions that, again, it's just from looking at it from a kind of historical perspective. I try to historicize, right? To say like what were the circumstances around land and at the time when the land was first acquired. Yeah.
So, what do you think should actually have happened there then?
It's a question that I haven't given as much thought to as I need to. Mm-hmm. So it's something that, again, I think that the focus of the paper was looking at the question around like how Waqf has been interpreted. But what I would maybe posit is to say that how might some of that wealth that has been generated go towards redressing in a very conscious way the kind of the harm that colonialism has caused. I think, and when we think about questions of land, what is the potential even within Waqf discourse and in our the laws around Waqf for the restoration and the restitution of land, right? And where does that maybe feature and configure in establishing justice, right? Because I go back to something that Advocate Tembeka Kaitobi said in his book Land Matters, where he said something to the effect that the patterns of land ownership that continue to shape our landscape in South Africa today will be the most accurate measure of reparations and the most accurate measure of restitution for the crimes of apartheid. We come from communities, many of us come from communities who were forcibly removed and displaced off their land. So land has and will and continues to play a very significant role in our own community's kind of landscape. Now, and that's something that maybe need to be explored a bit further.
Okay, are there any questions from the floor here?
Okay, what I want to know from you, Aasif, is the Niyaz family was it not given as Waqf to the Muslims of South Africa, right? So the Muslims of South Africa should benefit. So don't you think only one family is benefiting from the income and the resources of this land?
So I think
Can you just repeat the question?
Okay, so the question was, if the land was given for the Muslims, for the benefit of the Muslims of South Africa, and we find ourselves in a situation where one family seems to be deriving the most benefit, how might we deal with that, for lack of a better term?
Before you answer the question,
Yeah.
can I just add on to that question?
Mm-hmm.
From what we've heard, we don't know. But because brother,
So just to repeat.
Can we just okay, so there's a couple of points that have been raised. One point being one of the most common stories that is circulating around is that the land was donated by Portugal. Based on the information that I was able to gather, I wasn't able to find evidence necessarily to support it. Especially if we think chronologically, Paul Kruger died in 1905, the land was purchased by
Strata Estates Limited in 1934. So there's quite a large gap between Kruger's death and the purchase of the land. And on the question of, to what extent has the Muslim community benefited from that? And I think that, the family and the Bahawalpur Islamic Institute, for example, would actually be in a good stead to say that, they can make a case that in many ways the Muslim community has benefited. I think that if we look at the role that the Bahawalpur Islamic Institute played, this was an institution that had a printing press that produced many of the materials, makatib materials, that would be studied in madrasa. Many of the students who passed through Bahawalpur would go on to establish Darul Ulooms of their own. Bahawalpur was the headquarters of the Jamiatul Ulama in its early stages. And in that capacity, it served as a basis upon which, institutions that we may take for granted today, like a large part of the foundations were actually laid at Bahawalpur. So if you think about, for example, halal certification, before you had your Sanhas and MJCs and other bodies, a lot of that certification process was actually done in conjunction with the Jamiat and Bahawalpur Islamic Institute. There may be other examples, but I think I just wanted to make that point to ask the question around how do we conceptualize and make sense of what the Muslim community benefiting from that land might mean. Obviously, that doesn't, negate the very pertinent question around, the ways in which that land is held in trust and the benefit to the family. But again, I was operating with restricted information, right? Limited information. Based on what I was able to access that was in the public domain, this was the information that I was able to gain. And I'd be more than happy to share the paper with those who would like to read it and maybe engage with it a bit more deeply. But yeah, there's always more that could be.
No, I'm just saying because I've read it's also a serious, it's something spoken and not spoken. I think it's about 100 years to tell us the history of how this is and what the aim of the so there's such a lot of stories that everything even the right to
Yeah, sure. So there are other questions as well. Like,
they could be themselves. The history of this. Because remember that time, the colonials, when they were communicating with the history, because mostly with the Malay version. And the Indians were not really communicating with the Mohammedans. They were only later. That's why there's a lot of secrecy.
okay, there's also another question here that is posed, whether Mia's farm is a private family, what are the trustee conditions, etc. I think that it would be very difficult from what Aasif is saying, that he hasn't really gone into all those details because he hasn't had access to some of those documents. But I think it definitely needs further research, and what, as Uncle was saying, that we need to actually get more information from them. One of the things that the late Ibrahim Bhai Mia told me was that the history is being recorded, and he actually pointed to the angels that are actually writing the history. So the history is being recorded, but not on paper. Yeah. So that's and we'll. Sorry, you.
Sorry, I just wanted to just have one question. Sorry, Aasif. So while you were doing this research, did you find out where who donated the land, or when they purchased the land, who did they purchase the land from the Mia family? Or was it donated to the Muslims?
So the land was purchased from the estate of John Alexander Gibson. So the brothers that owned that land before the Mias, they were a group of, they were called the Gibson brothers, and they had established like a halfway house rest stop. Because if you think about where Mia's farm is, it's between Pretoria and Johannesburg. And in the 1930s, it's not an easy drive or commute to get between those two places. So the Gibsons had established, from what I could gather, they established this rest stop, which Kruger did stay at, you know, every now and again, like when you would make that journey. But according to the title deed, you know, it's listed as the estate of John Alexander Gibson, you know, that transferred to Witwatersrand Estates Limited, which was the company that Musa Ismail Mia had established. And yeah, and I think just one more point on that. For me, I think we can get maybe a bit caught up in the finer details about which we may not have as much information, right? But where we can maybe ask a question is, on whose authority was that land transferred? Right? On whose authority was the land transferred? So if we think about the history of how colonialism consolidated itself in South Africa, following the end of the Anglo-Boer War, or the South African War, we had the formation of the Union of South Africa. And the Union of South Africa was an exclusively white governmental authority that dictated these are the borders of South Africa. And the reason that the Union was founded, fundamentally, was to consolidate white minority rule in the country, right? Like it was as a means of kind of burying the hatchet between Boers and Afrikaners and saying that, you know, despite the bad blood that might be between us, what we are in agreement on is white supremacy. And it was on that basis that the Union of South Africa was formed, right? And this is the same union that in 1913 passed the Native Land Act, law that prohibited black people. And, you know, when we think about it in that light, you know, this is the same union that facilitated the transfer of that from the state of John Alexander Gibson to the Indians. And for me, that is where the question is situated. You know, what role family has played is one aspect. But the more critical question is in looking at the questions of authority and power and the structures of power that were responsible for facilitating that, and whether or not they actually had the right to facilitate that transfer. I mean, that's a question that could be debated, but from a historical perspective, I think it's justified.
Sorry, can I get over?
So Dr. Abdul Karim Malgoni has asked, you know, based on the conference, what key takeaways was the idea of, you know, how people responded to COVID-19 and whether there are new possibilities that have opened up in thinking about short-term market and how we might engage this. So one of the presenters works with very closely with Dr. Nasser is Dr. Mohammed Laila. And he has kind of expanded a little bit on the idea of Waqf al-Awaya. So the principle of emergency and what are the circumstances under which it may be reasonable to establish such a what might be a short-term measure, especially when you think about the circumstances and the immediate need that arose in the face of COVID-19. So if I am able to get hold of his paper, and maybe Dr. Nur Asya, if she is listening, that might be something that could be explored further.
Okay, I think we just got another question here, and perhaps this is from Dr. Nur Asya, and that is, what were the main takeaways from the Global Waqf Conference?
Main takeaways. Yeah, I think, like I said, Dr. Nur Asya's, elaboration on Waqf ecosystems for me was a big takeaway. Because I think that this principle can apply not just to the way that we think about Waqf, but in broader context, right, in the organizations that we're a part of, to think about the fact that all of us do not exist in isolation from, the complex relationships that make and shape our experiences. To think about our systems not in isolation from one another, but in very much in entangled relationship with one another. So for me, that was one of the big takeaways. But if I can maybe speak a bit more broadly about, if not takeaway from the conference itself, but I think also from the experience of traveling to Pakistan. What I found to be quite remarkable is in looking at the ways in which Islam was expressed and embodied by people in Pakistan. So Dr. Algoni was teasing me about, wearing a shalwar kameez, and this is something that I picked up while I was there. But in many ways, what I found is that, the form of Islam, it looked very Pakistani, right? So people, in the way that they dressed, in the languages that they spoke, in the kind of cultural practices that they, live by, it works very closely, and it gels very well with the practice of Islam, right? And it led me to thinking about, what does Islam in our context in South Africa look like, right? If we have to think about the cultural practices that we are creating and embodying and developing within our own communities, within our context, how might we think consciously? And this is something that my good friend Anwar Jetum and I have developed, like we've been discussing it quite a lot. It's to say, how do we think about forms of expressing and representing Islam that speak to our histories, that speak to our contexts, and that speak to the values that we want to live by, right? Like there's a tendency to say that, like, oh, we must separate Islam from culture, and that, that these two things are inherently incompatible. But, when we read the work of somebody like Dr. Umar Farooq Abdullah, he speaks about the cultural imperative, the need to articulate and to make meaning of our culture in beneficial ways, in ways that can tap into and feel the pulse of our communities and society. And so what is like an urban Johannesburg, like what is Islam feel like? So these are things that, yeah.
I know you have a question. Okay, I think that's a question that is directed at maybe about South Africa. I think what you've raised is really, really a very important question. And I think that, to be quite honest with you, it's something that like we're thinking almost on a daily basis. What are we doing? How are we creating that kind of impact in society? What type of institutions are we developing here? We know that we've got a lot of our institutions, for example, we've got a lot of schools, we've got over 100 schools which are essentially Waqf schools. They are, but they all fee paying mainly. So do we have any schools that are either no fee paying but excellent schools that are providing quality education to the public? And that's the kind of impact we can make. Do we have a sufficient number of hospitals and clinics, and special hospitals and clinics that we are developing? That we can say these are, as Dr. Al-Goni always says, where are your monuments? The Islamic monuments not just the mosques and the madrasas, but other kind of institutions. And I think that is something that we, as a
Community need to actually sit down and think about that to say this is where the Waqf system needs to go to. It's sufficient to say that we're mobilizing Waqf funds from communities and so forth, but when you look at the extent that you need, the amount of capital that you need to develop that, it could run into billions. Because I mean, you just take, for example, a small town village council, what sort of budget does it have? And so we as a community can actually, we've got the potential to do that. Exactly what you're saying. We've got the potential to do that, and that also we can do with resources within South Africa. We don't even need to go abroad. But of course, if we do get support from abroad, all the better, and we could speed up that whole process. And I think what you're also raising is the whole issue about the strategic objectives of Muslims in South Africa. And I think that's a question that we have to actually address as a community. Where are we actually going? فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ? Where are we going to? What is our purpose here? Are we just going and carrying on business as usual, or are we seeking a pathway that we can be influential in almost every facet of life in South Africa, and make that kind of impact that as Muslims, number one, we become indispensable, and number two, that there's a growing Muslim population in this country, and that Islam has got a major influence in the policies and the ways of life and culture in South Africa, inshallah. That's our prayer, inshallah. So I think we've come to the end of this program, and I'd like to call upon Brother Siddiq, who's our...
When we take care of each other, wonderful things happen. Children thrive, the elderly rejoice, communities celebrate. Awqaf South Africa, a charitable Waqf receiving organization, makes it easy to share the care. All donations are plowed into Sharia-compliant investments, while the fruits support a great variety of charitable causes. Visit the Awqaf South Africa website at awqafsa.org.za to discover how your Waqf can bless our community with the legacy of care. Awqaf South Africa, share the care.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And first and foremost, I think it's been a most insightful afternoon listening to Brother Aasif in terms of his experiences, and also in engaging on the Waqf platform, because I think it's something that, as Brother Zainul has just mentioned now, that it's going to need a lot more discussion in the context of South Africa, and how we actually expand and build this footprint of Waqf across communities, not just within the Islamic space, but across all communities in South Africa, because I think it's critical in terms of the understanding of Waqf and the role that it plays ways. And from an Awqaf perspective, there's lots of downstream projects that are involved, but those are things that we're going to have to look at and expand and try to establish that footprint on a much broader scale. But I think what I'd like to do in starting is to say to Brother Aasif a big thank you from Awqaf side for being courageous enough to take this on, I think, and to go outside of the borders of South Africa and to represent Awqaf South Africa on an international level. Because I think we in South Africa at Awqaf, through the efforts of brothers, have certainly established ourselves internationally. And what we've done is to help us to actually expand our international position and make sure that Awqaf South Africa is well represented. So big thank you to you. And we pray and ask you, Almighty Allah, to grant you continued success in all your studies and whatever you plan to do, and that you come back to us and come and expand on your knowledge that you gain through the platforms of Awqaf and Waqf, inshallah. We also thank Dr. Asia from Malaysia, the International Islamic University of Malaysia, for her contribution and for all the work that she does internationally and for really establishing Awqaf on a global basis. I think a tremendous amount of work that she puts into all of this, and we really pray that the Almighty Allah grant her health and strength, that she must continue to play this role internationally, and hopefully one day she'll come and visit South Africa and sort of expand more in South Africa on her experiences and her knowledge. To Hasanain, our product specialist this afternoon, a big thank you to you, and then to the Awqaf team here in Johannesburg as well for setting everything up and putting things in place so that we could have this very insightful feedback from our brother Aasif. And then to our online people, thank you as well for joining this afternoon. There's many other things that you could have done, but you took the time to be with us, as well as our guests in the room here in Johannesburg. Thank you so much for spending time with us, and I'm certain that you've learned a few more things and gotten a little bit more of the experience of Brother Aasif in terms of having attended the conference. And we certainly look forward to having a few more of these types of sessions where we can further expand on this very, very important institute of Waqf. So our big thanks to you, and we now close with what is traditional in Awqaf in terms of Asr. So we ask you all to read with us together. And again, a big thank you to everyone who was part of this session today. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal Asr. Innal insana lafi khusr. إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. Fi amanillah, and to everyone, travel back safely wherever you are, and thanks again for joining us this afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah, everyone. If they were
When we take care of each other, wonderful things happen. Children thrive, the elderly rejoice, communities celebrate. Awqaf South Africa, a charitable Waqf receiving organization, makes it easy to share the care. All donations are plowed into Sharia-compliant investments, while the fruits support a great variety of charitable causes. Visit the Awqaf South Africa website at awqafsa.org.za to discover how your Waqf can bless our community with the legacy of care. Awqaf South Africa, share the care.